My brief story, very brief story, of how I got into ukuleles is probably quite representative of people all over the country who got into ukuleles. We had a meeting at Forbes Library, the Smith librarians, and I discovered that they had a ukulele lending program. Started by 2 ukuleles given by Joe Blumenthal, who is here from Downtown Sounds, who also organized the AEIOUkes, which is a community ukulele group. And one day I went, you know, I want to learn how to play the ukulele. I'm a classically trained organist, and I've always wanted to play a portable instrument. And I said, one day I said, you know what, I really want to play something I can carry around with me. So essentially it took over my life. You know, I took the ukulele, so I bought a ukulele, I was at Forbes, and I midwifed a ukulele, I started a ukulele lending program at Smith because I thought that it was the absolutely perfect place to have it. And I was the midwife for the Smith Uke Club when they started that. Became a member of the Smith Ukes. So that's essentially what happened. And I met Jim and Liz Beloff at a workshop. And I met Stu, who is now someone I study with on a regular basis at Bernunzio's in Rochester, where my mother lives. So that essentially is the story of how I got to know all these people. And I'm a librarian. So I mean, I'm like a little fanatic about this. I'm a collector. I collect ukes. I collect music scores. And the upshot is, here we are at Smith, and I thought it would be a really great outreach program. I think it was a little bit of an experiment. There is some talk, those of you at the national level, you know, I discovered that Matthew at NYU, all of a sudden I can't remember what his last name, has also Wise has just gotten bitten by the ukulele bug. So now we're talking about doing some kind of session in Cincinnati, proposing a session for Cincinnati. So this is a little bit of an experiment to see what works, what doesn't work, and what have you. So you now understand why all these people here, Joe, Faith, who is the art music librarian at Forbes Library, who has the program, Stu, who is a master teacher. I learn something from Stu every time I take a lesson or go to a master class. He was wonderful, plus a great performer. And the stars of our show today, Jim and Liz Beloff, who basically were there, you know, they found a Martin ukulele in a flea market. They had the right set of skills, the interest, and you know, they're the epitome of being at the right place at the right time with the right stuff. This is going to be a very, very, very loose panel. We're small. I know all of you have no qualms about asking questions. I told Jim that I thought that if we have nothing to say, we could talk about publishing. Because this is a music library group. He can talk about, you know, research, copyright, name it. There is a handout, did you see it all, which I made up, of his publications in the order of publication, and I find it personally quite fascinating because it just shows you like how that field developed. So, with no further ado, yes? They are going to kick this off by singing a song.
Why not?
Well, it's about the ukulele. We should at least plant the sound in your head. Is it too early? It's after 10.
It may be too early for us.
Is that okay? Well, why don't you explain how we chose this one?
Well, before we do that, I'd just like to say that both Jim and I have gone to school here at Smith. In the 70s, we took classes. Jim went to Hampshire College, and you took, what, playwriting?
Here at Smith, that's right.
And I took a photography course, which I adored, and it's one of my greatest interests now. So.
And you're a Mount
And I was going to say that quietly.
Another singing school.
Another singing school. So, because it's going to be spring, I believe at 6:45 this evening, we're going to do a song that's an homage to spring.
Love is a many-splendored thing. It's the April rose that only grows in the early spring. Love is nature's way of giving, kissed and the world stood still. Then your fingers touched my silent heart and taught it how to sing. Yes, true love's a many splendid
It's an example of a very typical ukulele
Oh, yeah.
song.
Tongue in cheek.
Tongue in cheek. I know it's early in the morning. Okay. So,
Let this panel come to order.
Yes.
yes.
Right.
You want me to start telling my story?
Yeah.
I think it would be apropos for me to start telling my story because it kind of, well, I'll go back a little bit farther than Marlene did. I run a music store in downtown in Northampton, right in the middle of town, called Downtown Sounds. And there's a bunch of trade magazines that I get every month, and I faithfully read to see what's going on. And I read this story about how some music store donated a ukulele to a library, and I thought, oh, this sounds nice. And one of my missions in life is to try and get more people involved in music. There's relatively very few of the American public is actually involved in playing a musical instrument. One of the most depressing statistics that I know of is that more money is bet every year in the casinos of Las Vegas alone than is spent on musical instruments in the entire United States of America. And it just seems like a twisted sense of what's important in life. So I consider myself to be an evangelist for try and get people involved in music. And as you're going to find out in the not too distant future, ukulele is a very great way of making music accessible to people. And so I saw this story. I said, oh, I should do this. So I called up Faith and I said, I got this idea I heard this idea. I want to copy it. I could give you a ukulele and a book and a video and a case to carry it around in, and you could loan it out to people. What do you think? And she said, sure, I'll try that. And well, she can. Why don't you?
Oh.
You can describe what the reaction to it was.
Oh, so I said yes because I thought it was a great idea, and I checked with my boss, the library director, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting." She said, "Okay, you feed it, you clean up after it." So we publicized it a bit. We did. I'm going to show you our. How do you market the ukulele lending program at your public library? How did Marlene find out about it?
Went to a meeting.
You went to a meeting, yeah, so we weren't doing a great job, but we started out with, this is, pass these around, that's Joe in there and two of my coworkers who are sitting here. I made them pose. And we just put signs up. We sent it around, we sent out press releases, and we had this nice quote from Joe saying what he just said. And of course, as librarians, that's our mission too, is to encourage people to play music and make music. We've got all the score libraries to back it up, but if nobody puts an instrument in their hands, they're missing so much. So so we ended up with this wait list of like 24 people, so we had to get awesome. We had to get another one, and then we ended up with pardon me, getting off the ukulele track a little bit. We ended up doing a fundraiser, getting a whole pile more instruments to lend, and we became famous. Here, pass these around. We were in a comic strip that librarians get.
I think it was an LJ, wasn't it?
It was in, our photo of Joe and Jason and Ben was in LJ. And this is Unshelled, which all the librarians get. It's about ukuleles. Yeah, I'll pass these around.
Can you just read what
It says, some libraries check out ukuleles. Do they hate their patrons, or is it more of a general disdain for the community? And she says, they give the gift of music. He says, actually, technically, they lend the loan of music. I'm inspired. I'm apprehensive. I'm still waiting. So we were so honored to be world famous. We did other things, we did like programs. We have a genuine Hawaiian living in Northampton who plays ukulele and sings wonderfully. Her name is Frances Blasky, and so we did a concert. It was in January 2009, a few months after Joe gave us the first ukulele. So it was inaugurating the Hawaiian president and the ukulele lending program at the same time. So we tried to do those kinds of things, and then Joe's ukulele group, well, he'll talk about that, but ended up making the library the meeting place.
So it happens that Forbes has one particular room in the library that is just stunningly good for music. It's a really wonderful sounding room. That's where Frances played. One of the, in my experience, one of the obstacles that keeps people from trying to learn music is that they're afraid of, well, I don't want to invest all this money in the instrument because I don't know how good I'm going to be at it. So to be able to just pick up something in the library and borrow it with no risk to see how it's going to work out is a wonderful thing. I also go to a music trade show every year, and there's a booth there that Jim and Liz are usually at, and from one of his family members created this thing called the Fluke, which actually it used to be like, when did he start? It was what year?
99.
99.
My brother-in-law, Dale Webb, and my sister, his wife, was going to be here too, Phyllis Webb. But yeah, 1999.
So when I started out in business in 1976, you could buy ukulele, you could import ukuleles from Taiwan, and they were just really crappy. It was really, most of them didn't have decent tuning machines on them, so it was impossible for them to stay in tune. They really didn't sound good. And so if you wanted to play ukulele, you had a choice of going out and buying a Martin, which costs $1,000 or something like that, or you could buy one of these really crappy ukuleles that were made in Taiwan. And Jim's brother-in-law was really the first, I think, the first person that came into the American market with a real instrument, which I assume you helped him design. You must have, you didn't have anything to do?
Just inspired it and fanned it.
We
and
did. We took
encouraged it.
field trips down to Martin, and we met Mrs. McAferry. McAferry invented plastic ukes in the 50s, and we went to the factory and did all our research. So we were inspirational.
But you know, when Marlene was talking about like things coming together to create this ukulele boom, you know, from my standpoint as a musical instrument dealer, one of the things that happened was all of a sudden this Fluke came along, and for $200 or $300 or $200, you could buy a real instrument that had a really good sound. And all of a sudden, it started to make ukuleles accessible. And then 10 years later, the Chinese, having the restrictions of communism lifted from their economy, started making musical instruments, and they figured out how to do it. And so the ones of you who took ukes from over there, those are all Chinese-made ukuleles. But for $40 or $50, they're decent instruments that really stay in tune and that you can really play. So that was another one of the factors that came together to make it possible for ukuleles to be as big as they are today. At these trade shows, Jim and I used to talk about, well, one of these days you should come up and do a workshop for me. And it took like, I don't know, 6 or 8 years probably, but it finally happened. And you know, I've always like had a hard time doing workshops and making them work well, so I was a little skeptical whether it would work or not. But we rented the recital room at a local music school called the Northampton Community Music Center, and we did 2 workshops, a beginner's workshop and an intermediate workshop, and we got 20 or 25 people for each one, and it really worked out pretty well, and people really enjoyed it, and there were plenty of people there, so it was a success. And when it was over, people said to me, "Joe, we got to keep doing this. This is too much fun to just have it be a one-time thing." So we started having a meeting at the Community Music Center once a month. One of our members suggested the name AEIOUkes, which is on our little poster over there, and
Which I think is just brilliant, and I've heard a lot of club names, and this is way up there. And it starts with A too.
so I'm happy to say. I'm happy to say that there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At least 6 of our members are here today. So thank you for coming out and supporting us. I should make you all get up and sing a tune. I don't know if we're going to do that, but we meet once a month and we sing and we strum songs from what is one of the finest fake books, actually for any instrument out there, Jim Beloff's Daily Ukulele, 365 really wonderful songs with a nice arrangement and the right chords, and most of the time in singable keys. And the group has gotten so popular that actually Jim came out with a second songbook called the Leap Year Edition, another 366. And I love having one book that everybody has, and it's all in alphabetical order, and you just say, now we're going to sing 5 Foot 2 Eyes of Blue on page 60, whatever it is, and you turn to, and everybody's got it, and you don't waste any time. And so I don't want to have 2 books. But other people in the group, so I'm strictly an Old Testament guy. The Leap Year Edition is the New Testament. I'm not going there.
That's why we started the Saturday group.
So that's why the Saturday group started. So that they, so the Saturday group. So now we also meet once every, probably 6 or 8 times during the summer. We go out on Main Street in front of the farmers market and we sing and strum tunes for the people passing by. And the Ukes that were over there, I bring them along, and I encourage people to pick up a ukulele, and I teach them to sing Down in the Valley, 2 chords. It is so, and in 5 minutes I can get people singing along with the group. And it's pretty amazing, and the same thing's going to happen here later on. You'll see. So it's been very gratifying for me. And I last a little over a year ago, Pete Seeger died, and Pete Seeger was a guy who really believed in bringing people together through music. And I feel like what we do in AEIOUkes is I'm helping to carry on his legacy. It makes me feel really good. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Good story.
I'll bounce off that and share a little bit of my story. Similar to Joe, I really believe one of my life's missions is to bring music making to people, whatever their background. I think that we are born musicians. We just have to get our fingers to negotiate the air and the right patterns and all that. But music is beyond the physical training. It begins with hearing it and feeling it. So I love to do that. And I find the ukulele to be very, very accessible way of getting people to play. Is this yours?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just?
I noticed you said ukulele.
Yes, so is it ukulele or is it ukulele? Tomato, tomato,
We're not pulling the whole thing off, though. I don't care.
In Hawaii, the traditional pronunciation is, I believe, ukulele. And if you're a mainlander, you can say ukulele.
Or uke.
Or uke, but nobody says ook.
Yes, they do. There are a few who do say ook.
Bring your ook. Hey, I think you left the safety switch on. Hang on a second. I was a guitar player living in Buffalo, New York. I lived there for 20 years, so I remember the winter of 2001 was especially cold, for even by Buffalo standards. And I saw a a ukulele about this size, not of this quality. This is really, you can feel it. This is great. Yeah. So I had this $10 ukulele that I was taking with me on the bus rides to work, and I noticed this interesting thing would happen when I would take it out of my backpack. I would strum one thing. People on the bus would, in the middle of a miserable, sunless winter. You know, in Buffalo, you don't see the sun sometimes for months. It's ridiculous. And people would go, what the heck is that, you know? And then people would start looking in my direction. Good morning, sir. Good morning, how you doing? And I noticed after that, a really interesting thing would happen is total strangers would just start to talk to each other, make small talk with each other on the bus. And, you know, could have happened with any instrument, I'm sure, but, you know, coming in there with a viola, might have been, you know, a little more, you know. What's nice about the ukulele is that it can be foreground, it can also be just a pleasant background. It really can season the air of a room so nicely. People started to talk, and every time I got on the bus that winter, all these great conversations would happen. People go, wait, you went to Thomas Jefferson High School? No way, what year? 1964? You're crazy. So all these wonderful connections started to happen through music and the ukulele. That's something I was already passionate about with leading drum circles and guitar classes, but there was something about the ukulele's accessibility that was just really amazing. I found myself invited to teach at a charter school after that, and I led ukulele groups in baritone uke, that's the big one, baritone uke, and also the small ones for grades K through 8. And then a few years later, was honored to be given a position for 6 years. I was an artist in residence at a cancer hospital in Buffalo, New York. So I was on staff with 12 other artists who would work with at the bedside with cancer patients, their families, and even the hospital staff. So with a ukulele, often a ukulele, but sometimes a didgeridoo or a singing bowl, I would offer music of the uplifting vibration and compose music, spontaneous music with the patients who were there. So one nice thing about the design of the fluke, and maybe it's a fluke, just but being that it is plastic and the fretboard is plastic and the strings are plastic, it made it the perfect instrument for moving from room to room in the hospital. When I was working in the bone marrow transplant unit, the nurses and the doctors, they were all really concerned about cross-contamination. With the fluke, I could just wipe it right down with a Calvi wipe. That's hospitals. Anyway, it'd be totally sanitized, and then I could put it in the hands of someone else who wanted to try it. So, yeah, the fluke is a wonderful...
I bet Dale never thought of that, did he?
No, we've never heard that.
I was talking to Deborah about it. Yeah, it's a nice side effect of the uke, a nice perk. And then a few years later, was awarded a grant from to my surprise, a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts to compose music with the ukulele and people starting from scratch. So I'm sharing all this with you. If you've never picked up a uke before, and today's going to be your first jam session, you're in for a real treat because it's very, very accessible and easy to play, and wonderful to see how the music really can enrich people's lives beyond the jam experience. It just does something to you to have music as part of your everyday practice. It's a wonderful release. So, that's part of my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So Stu, when you finally warmed up the people on the bus on the way to work and they're all talking, isn't that sort of self-defeating? They couldn't hear the ukulele after that, right? They're all
Yeah, well,
right?
then I was just another cocktail party gig.
Yeah.
Not everything can be a focused thing. And it's wonderful to be of service that way. I do feel drawn to just be the,
You're the icebreaker.
I'm bringing the sonic wallpaper. That's a really bad word in some musical circumstances, but in some musical, communities, I'm not wallpaper, but actually it's a wonderful service, I think, to bring that background, and then it gets in there and it enhances the conversation. So, yeah.
Jim?
Okay. Well, we stumbled, as Marlene said, we stumbled on a tenor Martin ukulele at the Pasadena Rose Bowl Flea Market in 1992,
And Liz had her checkbook that day.
unfortunately. Since then, I've said to people, be careful what you buy at a flea market, because it can really change your life. We had no intention of going into the music publishing business, of learning all these things about publishing books and things like that. It just sort of evolved. We had real jobs. Liz worked in the movie graphic design business, and I worked for Billboard magazine. And the ukulele just took us over. And since that time, we've released, I think, close to 30 songbooks, all distributed by a company called Hal Leonard, if you're familiar with them, out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And the reason we got into this is that, like ukuleles in those days, you couldn't really find music for it. If you went to a music store and you looked in the ukulele bin, you would find maybe, if you're lucky, one book from the 50s with a guy,
Mel Bay,
wearing a suit playing the ukulele. So we realized that there was a need there.
In fact, we were sort of serving the need before it was there. This is pre-internet, but when we started to put out our first books, the very first one was called, and Liz came up with we needed a brand name, and we were being sort of boomer kids and having a real appreciation for sort of 50s and 60s promotion and logos and things like that, and knowing that the ukulele corniness, and knowing that the ukulele was very representative of a very colorful time in Hawaii. It's often associated with these kind of rainbows and this kind of idolized image of the 50th state. We sort of played with that and recognized too that some of the books from the earlier waves of popularity, the ukulele's first wave is considered from about 1915 through much of the 20s. The second wave, who can tell me when the second wave was and who was responsible for it?
Arthur Godfrey.
Arthur Godfrey. In the 50s, a gentleman by the name of Arthur Godfrey was the king of all media at that time, and he had a number of television shows, including briefly a television show where he taught you how to play the ukulele just before the CBS News.
Actually, Stu would be great doing that right after the news. Had it, or during mellow.
Depressed? Here.
Yeah.
So Arthur Godfrey learned to play from a shipmate, of course, all World War II related, and he played a deeper instrument. Was involved with creating the baritone uke. But the first uke that he played on his show was McAferry's plastic ukulele. And thanks to his early encouragement of that instrument, they eventually sold 9 million of those plastic ukuleles. Some of you may remember when you were kids having a plastic ukulele. Anyway, that was kind of thanks to Arthur Godfrey. And now, of course, we're in this third wave. But there was, after the second wave, there really wasn't much other than the blip of Tiny Tim. And we're not quite sure whether that helped or not. But prior to Arthur Godfrey, you had these characters like Ukulele Ike and other kind of fun names. And so Liz decided to come up with the name Jumpin' Jim, because ukulele in Hawaiian is often translated as jumping flea. And I wrote a book on the history of the ukulele. If you're interested, we've got copies here, and it tells you the whole story.
So that was sort of a cruel thing.
It was a cruel thing,
Since
I don't really jump much.
Laid back guy and jumping Jim.
That's because of your layup shot.
That's right. So I became Jumpin' Jim, and we thought we would do one book because we had found all of these old songbooks, Cliff Edwards songbooks with all these wonderful old songs, and we found
Cliff Edwards.
Cliff Edwards was known as Ukulele Ike. That was his kind of stage name, and a a singer of popular songs. He was a Broadway actor. He was also a movie star, and he published songbooks and all of this. In any case,
But he's most famous.
oh yes, of course, he's most famous for singing "When You Wish Upon a Star" in Pinocchio.
Voice
That's the voice
of Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah.
That beautiful, soft voice that we love.
So.
But he had these great songbooks that we found. In fact, my father had one, and the covers were really fun. It was all that, you know, that disembodied head from the 50s, and a ukulele, and, you know, great songs. And so, is there one here?
Yeah, so this was the idea. So we thought we'd do
there's
one book,
Jim's
and there's
head.
the disembodied head, which was sort of a riff on the 30s and 40s books. And all this. Liz is a graphic designer by trade, and so she loves type. And so the whole thing was really kind of a riff on an earlier era. And the ukulele was pretty much dead as a doornail when we put this out. Hal Leonard, even though they published gazillions of books,
It's a dead record.
didn't really have much in the way of ukulele, so they thought, all right, well, we'll put this out and see what happens. And it did better than they ever imagined. And so they came to us and said, would you do a how to play book? And so we did a how to play book. And then I think we did one more, and we thought, well, that's it. We've done 3 books. Ukulele guy Cliff Edwards had done 3 books in 3 different colors. So we had done this and this and this, and so we thought, well, now we've done what Cliff Edwards did, and we still have regular jobs, and we couldn't really put more time into this, and we thought, we're done. We did it. We scratched that itch, and then all of a sudden, this thing starts bubbling up, and I will sort of kick into one great story, which is that there was enough of a demand that they said, why don't you keep doing these things? And of course, it's a question of what kind of songs you want to do. And since we're kids of the 60s, and nothing is more meaningful to us than the songs of the Beatles. And we realized that pretty much the ukulele had died pre the Beatles. Tiny Tim happens in sort of afterwards, after the Beatles break, but the Beatles break in 63? And suddenly the world shifts to the guitar. Everyone wants to play a guitar. And so I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to do a book of Beatles songs arranged for the ukulele? So we, how do I tell this story? Very briefly, what I'll say is that just prior to this, I wrote a book on the history of the ukulele and tried very hard to get George Harrison to write the appreciation for it, because I knew that George Harrison loved the ukulele so much, in fact, that he had a home in Hawaii. And there was a big documentary on the Beatles and a scene of him playing the ukulele. So we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could get George to write the foreword to this book? He had been ill at the time, and so it didn't work out. But we did learn that he loved this book when it came out, and he bought copies for all of his friends as Christmas gifts. Fast forward to a trade show that Joe mentioned in Los Angeles, and it was the first trade show that we had. We had just introduced the flute, and a friend of George Harrison's comes by the booth. He recognizes that book, and he says, oh, my friend George gave it to me. And then he proceeds to say, my friend George, as in Harrison, is in town, and I think he'd love to see your ukulele collection. And so, what do you say about that? It's like a Beatle's going to come to your house. It just, so we didn't think this was going to happen.
No way.
And we didn't even tell anybody, because we just thought, this doesn't happen. So you can...
Well, the friend was going to bring him over in the afternoon in February of '99, and they had all these errands to do. Like, the friend would call, we're getting George a coffee at Starbucks, and then we're stopping by George's dentist, and this was he'd call every half an hour with the update, and we thought, they're going to blow us off, forget it. And then, about 2 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang, and they both walked in.
And so in walks Danny Farrington, a very, very well-known luthier, builder of instruments.
Beautiful guitar.
And in walks in George, and the first thing that George Harrison does is he grabs the uke off the wall and he starts singing, "I'm leaning on a lamppost at the corner of the street in case a certain little lady comes by." Now, for those of you who are deeper into the ukulele world than we may know, anybody can throw out why he might have sung that song?
From the AEIOUkes.
I wonder.
Yeah, I heard it.
I heard
Say
it.
it louder.
George Formby.
George Formby. That's right. Because before Herman's Hermits had that hit, it was actually a big hit for a very famous British entertainer named George Formby. And all of the Beatles' parents were big Formby fans. He was massive. He was like Elvis in England. And so that was a big hit from George Formby. And then we spent the next 3 hours of the afternoon.
After he played that song, that sort of solved the problem of what do you do with the quiet Beatle? Because he really did. I mean,
He was the not-so-quiet Beatle. And I think it was all thanks to the ukulele. I think if we put a guitar in his hands, it might have been a different story. But this
In
freed
fact,
him
you
up.
had your guitar in the open, but it had a broken
Imagine
string on
that.
it. So.
You actually had a guitar there while he was there. But we played ukes the whole afternoon, and I'll share just a couple of very brief anecdotes. At one point, I said to him, this book was just about to go to press, and I said, you know, it's incredible that you're here, and I've had so much fun arranging the Beatles songs for ukulele, and they sound so good. And so we started, for example, and we started to sing
All My Loving.
All My Loving. And so there we are, all of a sudden, George Harrison, Liz, I, and Danny Farrington, and we're all singing "Close Your Eyes and I'll Kiss You" on ukuleles.
And looking at each other like deer in headlights, like remember this moment. Remember this moment.
So, and then I'm thinking to myself, you know, I've got George Harrison in my house. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So, and this book is about to go to press, and I thought I can't let this moment pass, and so.
Jim was in sales before this.
So I said, so I said, you know, I'm about to send this book off. It'd be so wonderful if I could somehow get him to participate in some way. And so I said to him, as he's pretty much getting ready to leave, I said, would you just write on a piece of paper, and I gave him a piece of stationery. I said, would you write why you like the ukulele? And this is what George wrote. He said, everybody should have and play a uke. It's so simple to carry with you, and it is one instrument you can't play and not laugh. It's so sweet and also very old. Some are made of wood, some are made of armadillos. I love them. The more the merrier. Everyone I know who is into the ukulele is crackers. So get yourself a few and enjoy yourself. Love from George, and then Keoki is his Hawaiian name. That's George in Hawaiian. Harrison. And then fortunately, he allowed us to use that as kind of the appreciation. So that was our George story. And as he left, Liz and I we did our Beatlemania scream.
Just explain how he exited, because it's so good.
Well, for those of you, yes, it is wonderful. You know, we had a really wonderful 3 hours with him, and so he's getting ready to go, and we actually hugged, and he had a good. I think the ukulele brought us together too. He just was free to be his ukulele self. And as he's leaving, he runs over to our piano and he does this. Da 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 da. See you later. And I thought to myself, how incredibly wonderfully corny. He left with playing the lick to his most famous song, which, as you know, is the opening to Something, right? You know, something in the way she moves, da 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 da, and then see you later. So.
And then as soon as they were out of earshot, we screamed. We screamed for about 10 minutes.
No pictures taken?
Oh yeah,
There are pictures, but they didn't want us to publish them. George had been ill. He looked great though, and maybe he didn't want that, but we do have pictures.
Yeah.
So while we're on the subject of the Beatles, I should say in Northampton we have a annual show called The Really Big Show. It's a spoof on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was the creation of Bob Silman, who leads the Young at Heart chorus. I don't know if any of you saw the Young at Heart movie, which is about our local senior chorus. And he also came up with this 4 Sundays in February. And our AEIOUkes group has performed twice on stage at the Academy of Music. And but last February, or a year ago, last February, the 50th anniversary of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, we played the Beatles on the stage of the Academy of Music in Northampton at the spoof on the Ed Sullivan Show. We did All My Lovin', we did I Want to Hold Your Hand, and we did She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah.
And you even played the Hofner bass.
And I played a Beatle bass instead of my usual upright bass, right? And the most amazing thing is that I got all the members of the group. I said, you know, we can't go on stage at the Academy of Music with our music stands and our daily ukulele songbooks. We have to know these tunes. And they memorized the tunes. We did it totally without music. And the next time the group met, I said, so now we know the 3 Beatles tune, let's do them. I had a revolution on my hands. They would not do it without the book.
No, we forgot it.
Yeah, in a month. Anyway, but so AEIOUkes played the. We were the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
And Beatles songs are great.
Yes, they are.
All the chord
And
changes are.
actually, our first gig that we ever did was also on stage at the Academy of Music when Jim was there. Bob Silman put together a show called Ukes and Yo-Yos, and the show opened up with AEIOUkes playing Under the Boardwalk while our local yo-yo club did yo-yo.
You should have seen our faces when he proposed this. Oh, yeah. But it was really great fun. Really fun.
So, you want to have them ask questions?
Yeah, I do that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm really excited to hear about this. We actually in our collection have a good chunk of music from that first wave. So I'd be interested to hear just a little bit more about how that first wave started in America. We've got dance folios especially, but also some sheet music. And a little bit about how it became so closely associated with Ivy League college boys.
That's a good question. By the way, you're all welcome, and I'll get back to your question in 1 second, but it triggered this. We brought this, over the 22 years we've been doing this, we've accumulated a huge ephemera collection. And so this applies to those of you who are music librarians. And this represents just sheet music with ukulele in the title. So everything from the ghost of the ukulele to ukulele daily and spelled U-K-A-L-E. So you can see the sort of...
And daily spelled D-A-L-Y.
One of my favorites is when they play the rosary on the ukulele. Anyway, yeah, so that is, a lot of these are from that first wave. And there was... You have some sheet music then from what, the late teens and early 20s?
Yeah, teens and the dance folios go through the 20s in American and German, with a lot of American songs.
Yeah, it was so popular. There's an expression that you learn when you get into anything having to do with music in Hawaii, and that's an expression called hapa haole, which really translates to half white. And a lot of the music that was coming out of Tin Pan Alley at the time was considered hapa haole, and the definition was that basically it was a typical sounding Tin Pan Alley tune, like 5'2" Eyes of Blue, but the subject matter was Hawaii. It had Hawaiian imagery in it, and sometimes it even had some Hawaiian language in it as well. And
like there are songs like, oh, how she could wicky wacky woo.
right.
Or they're wearing them higher in Hawaii. Higher in Hawaii.
Now, wicky wacky woo is just sort of nonsense syllables,
Right,
but
but-
then some of them, actually used, like Tahua,
Of the Hawaiian war
the
chant.
Hawaiian war chant.
And My Little Grass Shack.
Little
has
Grass
some
Shack,
Hawaiian,
Right.
That's
Yeah.
right. Which is actually a very tiny fish in Hawaii. But anyway, in the dance folios, I've come across those as well. They usually have no lyrics in them, so they're kind of an oddball book. And it was, I think, made mostly for instrumental bands that wanted to play the songs at the time. So it was sort of popular for dance bands and things like that, and for people, who were out dancing.
And as far as the, schools like Yale and all that.
Oh, right.
I'm not sure how, it became the craze after about 1915. When there
So
was,
how did it come to be popular in 15, and how did it become sort of a school guy's fad? Yeah.
If you do, I talked briefly to Marlene about it. I'm absolutely certain that Smith had a ukulele club in the 20s.
And we'd love a picture of that if it could be found.
We have ukulele banjo clubs.
Yeah?
That's but not sorry, I mean banjo, guitar.
You had a mandolin.
The
And the
mandolin
mandolins
grew,
were
but
very
but
popular.
I don't know that I found anything with ukuleles.
Yeah, I have to look for that.
Was there something that happened in Hawaii that made people pay more attention at that
There's
particular
something
time?
that happened in San Francisco.
Well,
Yeah.
the San Francisco exhibition brought all that exotic culture to the mainland, and maybe it just the symbol of freedom and the appeal to the college kids.
Right, it was the first time that Hawaii had a pavilion, in a World's Fair, and so many people came to that, and there was Hawaiian music, and this was something new and novel and portable, and it just took off. It was a craze. So that's probably, it was the hot thing, and kids liked the hot thing.
It was called the Panama Pacific Exposition in 1915, and it was in honor of the opening of the Panama Canal, and it was the equivalent of a World's Fair, as you might know it if you've been to one. And Hawaii at the time, which was a territory, decided to invest at the time $100,000 to build a pavilion where they could present their music and their food. I guess if you went to the pavilion, you were treated to all sorts of exotic delicacies.
Like poi.
Like the poi and the tropical fruit and all of that. And then there were Hawaiian performers who were playing all day long, and millions of people came to this exposition and were introduced to this culture for the first time. And it is, along with other things that happened on the mainland at the time, that is really considered one of the major events that happened on the mainland that introduced the instrument, the hula as a dance, and sort of this kind of Hawaiian pop culture that we still think of today. It introduced it to a lot of people at one time. And so the ukulele just took off kind of from there, and sales went through the roof, and everybody was playing it, and it became a mainstream instrument. And I guess that included a lot of college kids as well.
And it's good for wooing, too. Love songs.
It's wonderful what you're saying. I would like you to address, because I think that there is now a very profound third wave due to the very large
Oh yeah, very
Hawaiian
much so.
band. Something, Over the Rainbow, his song was used on
Absolutely.
sitcoms and everything. And then the phenomenon of Jake Shibabakura and his virtuoso brother, who happened to live next door to my pilot's son in Honolulu, and whenever I visit, they come over and play.
Oh wow.
And I have been instrumental in trying to introduce Jake to Elliot Fisk of the Guitar Fest, which is a feature that happens in Boston every June. And I'm making inroads because first there was Django Reinhardt, which is a phenomenon for young guitarists. And now, do you think that is a good thing for young virtuoso guitarists, that they could also pick up the way flutists have morphed, to Brazilian flute and ethnic flute and present that in
It's a
concerts?
great question. We've published, and this goes back to what Marlene had said. It was very kind of her to do a listing of all the books as we did them. At some point, I guess it may have been our 8th or 9th book, we did a book of classical music, Bach, etc., all arranged for ukulele by the great John King, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But he was, without argument, the finest player of classical music on the ukulele. And since then, we've done 4 books. We're working on our 4th book of classical music. This will include Clair de Lune and and Satie and Beethoven and Fauré and Grieg, all arranged for ukulele. Prior to that, we did a book of Baroque music and then lute music from the 1500s. And so, to get to your point, really, it is Katie bar the door, as they say. Anything is possible on this instrument. I was commissioned to write a concerto for the ukulele in 1999 and did it and wrote a piece called "Uke Can't Be Serious." And I'm going to be performing it next month in Santa Monica, California with the Santa Monica High School Symphony.
That's wonderful, because
And,
that's what you're doing has to happen to infuse music, in particular classical music, because it's a dead end for young people.
But it's wide, and yet it's wide open in this area. It's just really, you're limited only by your imagination. So what you're doing with, and Jake, I believe, is going to be performing a concerto that was written for him this summer.
This fall, he's coming to Buffalo.
To do it?
In November, he'll be there.
So it's you know, it is absolutely wide open what you can do. It's just, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, a guitar has 6 strings, this has 4. But other than that, pretty much anything that you could do on a guitar, you should be able to do in some way or another, with some limitations. As Jake likes to say, it's just 2 octaves, so you have to be very clever about how you reduce these arrangements. But you should be able to do almost anything that you can do on a guitar in some way or another with a uke. So your idea of introducing Jake to a guitar prodigy makes perfect sense.
This is, speaking of the third wave, how many have seen The Mighty Uke, or Ook, whatever? This is an awesome documentary.
Actually had it playing in the background for me, and I turned it off.
Great history about the instrument and a lot of the things we're talking about here. How
This should be in every library.
yeah, it's a great story really of how Hawaiian culture came to the mainland and how the third wave of ukulele is really, it's not going anywhere. Unless there's going to be a 4th wave, but it'll be 3.5. I think. It just keeps on growing. There's more and more people playing it all the time. There are more and more festivals across the country. A new one springing up every year. So it's really,
If you're familiar with this hit song that's everywhere, it was a huge hit last year, which is called by Meghan Trainor. What's the title?
It's all about the
It's all about the bass, and it's sort of it's a fun novelty song, and there's nothing about it that would make you think ukulele, except for the fact that she wrote it on a ukulele. And if you look hard enough, you can find her on YouTube playing it on a ukulele, and she's, you know, and she actually got the record label to release it as a single after she performed it on a ukulele. I brought this was in this week's New York Times, and I just thought it was pretty amazing that this is the arts section of the New York Times, and here's a story about Meghan Trainor, who I just mentioned. You know, it's all about the bass, and it mentions that on her album she has ukulele on it, and then there's a story about South by Southwest, which I think is happening right now in Austin, Texas. And here's a band featured in their ukulele-focused trio of women who are down in Austin looking to break into the big time. But it's just, I mean, there it is on the arts and leisure section, and both stories coincidentally have to be about this instrument. And so you think, what is, you know, what's going on here? And then another high water mark, relatively recent. After kind of, you know, the Beatles came out and said Paul McCartney was very outspoken about how much he loved the ukulele, and other well-known pop artists were saying that it was great and they were playing it. Then another thing that helped with credibility with a younger generation was that Eddie Vedder, if you're familiar with Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder, about I guess 4 years ago, wrote an entire record called Ukulele Songs. And amazingly, we got a phone call from his management saying that it turned out that Eddie Vedder learned how to play the ukulele from our songbooks, and so he'd like to have a book that went with a CD that was just like our Jumpin' Jim books, and so
Except more expensive.
and more expensive.
With the bookmark.
And this is what his group does, and they printed 5.
Is it possible to get a copy of that still?
They printed 5.
I know that, but I'm trying to figure out how to get a copy.
They are so expensive, it's ridiculous. That they came out and they were sold out in about 2 days, all 5,000 copies, and that was it. And so So you can take a look at it. Yes.
Number 23 there.
No, they're all marked 23. He has a sort of a fascination with this number. And
Because it's his birthday.
oh, that's right. There you go. His birthday is December 23rd, which is Liz's.
That's why I remembered. They're beautiful illustrations.
Oh, wow.
And he actually, with permission, he got to, use our how to play section and some of the illustrations.
Yeah, I was
Looks
gonna say.
looks familiar.
Right.
Yeah. Well, he didn't really, he didn't have the time or really the patience to figure out what he was playing. So he simply sent me his CD and he said, "You figure out what I'm doing." So for most of the songs, it wasn't too bad. And then for some of the songs, he was kind of approaching the ukulele. If you know Pearl Jam music, he's a guitarist and he's really being very open with his fingering, and so he's coming up with some chords that are just not traditional, and I'm flailing. I'm not quite sure how he's making this chord, and so he was on a world tour, and I would write to him and say, "I'm just not getting what you're doing here," and he had a flip camera with him wherever he went, and so I'd wake up in the morning and there was Eddie's latest video, wherever he was in the world, and he would then say, "Okay, this is what I'm doing," and he would just videotape his fingers and how he was making the chords. That's how you're doing it.
The grunge method. Put your finger here, put your finger there.
So I'd also like to make sure that everyone knows all of these books were done by Liz and me. This is a joint effort from the very beginning. We worked
Mom and pop.
truly as a mom and pop. So all of these books are really our efforts. And the Daily Ukulele actually is Liz and Jim Beloff. And Liz brings with it not only her graphic design approach, which if you look through the Daily Ukulele, is filled with ephemera. We collect we especially love to find photographs of people playing the ukulele. And that's a great day when we can go to a flea market and find just some little black and white photo from the 50s of somebody
And
playing
especially
the
when there's a little name on the back, like Larry or Ruth, 1950 or something. And so we put them in the book and we feel like these are our friends now, Larry and Ruth. When you're practicing, they'll keep you company.
So, and also Liz grew up with, this is no small part of how we made this work. I had a great affection for the music that was kind of my time, which is starting in the 60s. Liz happened to be raised with Lawrence Welk.
I was hoping you weren't going to mention that.
And so, fortunately, and she also was in an a cappella group at Mount Holyoke, and so she came with her a great appreciation for sort of 50s and earlier songs. And so when we found a lot of these early Cliff Edwards books that were filled, of course, with songs from the period, like, When the Deep Purple Falls, and Deep Purple, and a lot of these great old standards, she knew them, and I'm playing these gorgeous, pretty little ukulele chords, and that's how we kind of fell in love with that period and those songs.
Little ukulele tuner, there are these visual ones where you choose your tuning scheme, which kind of would be nice if you didn't have to choose it, if it would just tell you what the most common one was. But anyway, we knew that. And then you click on the peg and it goes blink, blink, blink.
Yeah, it's like a virtual uke to help you tune.
Yeah,
and there are YouTube videos as well.
It's everywhere. And apps, not to worry. Yeah, we'll basically lend out anything that people don't spit in. So we're actually going to add some more instruments.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, and you're actually getting towards it, which was I was going to ask for the librarians who are lending instruments. What are the things that you found that you needed to keep in mind, or that really surprised you about this kind of lending collection?
Well, kind of what I just said. We chose instruments that were only handled by hand, so we wouldn't have to worry about whether it was clean.
Right.
We chose things that were not super expensive. Marketing is huge. You have to let people know that you have it. We limited it to not going in interlibrary loan because we didn't want them to be dropped in a book drop and in the bin in the van and sent through delivery. So we'll lend to people who don't live in Northampton, but they have to come and get it and return it from us.
You have a book drop that's shaped like a ukulele.
It's a hula girl meeting.
Padded.
Yeah, it's like in the Roadrunner cartoons, like wherever you pass through, there's a hole in the shape of. Yeah, we do try to tune them. We have this great resource in Joe and other staff in his store where if something needs a repair, we know where to go. We get the strings there as well.
What's the loan period?
3 weeks, renewable.
Do people reserve it when it comes back, or is
Yeah.
it free for all?
Yeah, we do end up keeping some wait lists. We've actually been given a couple more instruments and people knew that we had it. We've received our second guitar, our second banjo, and our first violin. Not to be confused with first violin, it's a pretty ordinary violin, through donations.
Have you met people who said, you know, I learned thanks to that ukulele at your library?
They've mostly gone on and bought their own. When the wait list was long and the ukulele was so hot, this is proof that it's
Oh,
really
yeah, but
hot.
you know, it really helps if you have Paul. Because
Yeah.
she has a waiting list and she let me have it. Because the person hadn't shown up. I said,
But is that some people, by the time their turn came up, they said, oh, I bought one. So, which means A, we needed more, B, it's very, very popular and they want it because their friends are playing and, I mean, people are walking around Northampton with
Are you
ukuleles
sure
all the time.
Joe isn't the one who takes it out?
Joe takes them out and says,
Store.
well, they're available at downtown sales. I guess you can't sign one out.
I find that in the beginning of the year, they're all out. And then as the year goes on, they start to be in because they've not gone out and bought their own.
Oh, right, because you have sort of more academic year population.
Also, everybody has a New Year's resolution. I'm going to learn to play an instrument this year, right?
So I'm just curious what the average price of a good starting ukulele
You
would
could
be.
get a decent beginner's uke for under $50.
Oh, okay.
If you can spend up to $100, you get something that's significantly nicer. The $50 ones are made out of a synthetic material.
Right.
The better ones are wood. The Flukes and Fleas that.
This is the flea, by the way. It's a smaller.
That's the one that you have over
Is
there.
that based on the
I see a flea
shape?
right
These
here.
these are in the $200 to $300 price range.
And made in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Oh, if you were looking for a trip, I mean, they're in Sheffield.
Sheffield, right?
And it's a great visit to go out. You can get seconds, and they have all the Fleamarket music books, and it's just, I really enjoy that. And it's on the other side of Great Barrington.
It's a
To
fun
go out,
visit.
it's a really fun visit.
It's called the Magic Fluke Company, and that's our Jim's. I branded that too. Jim's sister and brother-in-law run that.
And you can get almost anything that you want. You can design your own now.
A question for Joe now. It seems that even if you started this just out of the goodness of your heart, it's been a really effective marketing tool for your business.
Oh,
Are you sort of spreading the word to other music shop owners that this is a really good way to build up goodwill as well as actual sales?
Well, it's not just me. I mean, this wave is nationwide, and ukuleles have done a lot to help me survive over the past